O'clock, and we are here for continuation of our planning meeting. Do you want to, Jake, do you have a microphone?
I think last time I was up at the podium, I kept sitting back down because I learned after an hour of my fetus. So this is a continuation of last week's meeting. The only thing on the agenda now is to continue discussion on the implementation component. We wrapped up last meeting. We finalized, I think, our discussion on land use, and then we were working on discussion on natural resources. I have some notes about policy number 3, so I think that's as far as we got without going back and reviewing the video itself. The Planning Commission had a discussion last night, but we didn't touch on any of these things. And I think that's last time. I think the format of the meeting was to discuss the component goals, policies, and objectives, the updates, give the Planning Commission an opportunity to discuss and answer any questions from the board, and then open up for public comment if you want to stick with that same format. Chair.
All right. I think we should stick with the same format that allows us to go through. So does the board have any questions on this one?
I don't.
No, just so to confirm, we're on the natural resources.
Yeah.
I thought we had pretty much talked through all the policies in this section.
Mm-hmm.
The note that I have says change policy C3 to state as identified by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. There was some discussion about, so we had some discussion about this, and I think I committed last meeting to craft a revision, a red line version of this for you guys' hearing on the 12th, which is now next week, so get it done.
And then it was a really minor item, but I think on policy 5, we were going to change in the parentheses the word link to digital.
Anything else from the board on natural resources?
Nope.
Is there any community comment on natural resources? All right, we'll move on to hazardous areas. Does the board have any comment on this section?
A couple items. Unless there's something, Commissioner, you want to go over first.
I just had a question on number 7 of the policies, where it says the ingress and egress routes as determined by the fire authority having jurisdiction. I think that's a good idea. I just want to be careful that we don't start using outside agencies to dictate or control our land use issues. I think in this case, it's fine because they're going to be talking about with the roads and turnarounds, I'm assuming.
Okay.
I think it's just comes down to a matter of if it's an advisory role or if they actually have official jurisdiction on an item.
Can they actually say no to something, no to a request? Or should we be talking, instead of talking about the local fire authority, should we be using International Fire Code on road construction?
We haven't adopted as a county the fire code, so we don't uphold or review for the fire code. That's when we send these land divisions and other conditional use permits out to these fire districts. We're expecting them to be the subject matter expert and to advise us as to what conditions should apply. So it would be a much bigger administrative burden if we were to adopt the fire code and try to implement that countywide. I'm sure a lot of fire districts would be thrilled by that, but it's not something we've entertained thus far.
Okay. I'm just concerned about certain people that may or may not want to weaponize their authority in a situation. I want to be aware of that.
I understand that concern, but I also think that that's a lot of what our comp plan is there's subject matter experts that we take their input and opinion into consideration. And I think even on planning commission, zoning commission, even on the board, sometimes we receive a response from an outside agency and we argue our way of, well, no, like we did with the schools is a good example. We used the school, we asked them for their opinion, and then we actually went through what they wrote and said, well, it wasn't really applicable based on the way that they submitted their information. I think the reason I think it belongs here is because that's part of the health and safety aspect, and they're the subject matter expert. And then it's our job to kind of go through that opinion and make sure that it's meeting what we have to make a decision on. So I think that's why you're saying it's okay that it's there. I think it's important that the board recognize it's not yes or no, therefore we don't look at it. It's they said yes, now let's look at what they said and digest what they said.
I agree. Our responsibility is to consider what they say, but they don't dictate the final decision that we make. So, but I agree. I mean, if somebody tries to weaponize something, we should recognize that
Right.
and address it accordingly.
Does the board have any further on this?
I do have a few. So policy 2, I'm just wondering if we'd be better off indicating that development within floodplains should be avoided. Or sorry, within floodways should be avoided.
On that one, is that written that way because sometimes people can try to do a development and meet criteria by which it becomes okay versus just saying outright no? That's what I couldn't
Yeah.
tell
And
if that's what that was.
3 is along the same lines, right? At the end of the day, floodplain, floodway development is ultimately regulated by federal agencies. And so do we just change the language in policy 2 and 3 to somehow just indicate the fact that we need to conform to the federal jurisdiction when it comes to floodplain and floodway development?
Well, these policies will lead towards, so the way I read that is discouraging residential, commercial, industrial development, meaning when you're establishing your comp plan map and your zoning map, you're not establishing like commercial industrial areas within or near the floodway. So that's the way you're discouraging that. We initially had this as prohibit, and our floodplain certified floodplain manager, Jason Johnson, came up and said, whoa, we don't want to prohibit, because you get into a situation where once it's prohibited, it's a whole other. You guys remember that whole conversation?
Yeah, and that's exactly,
Yeah.
Matt Linska here, that's exactly what I was going to go ahead and bring up, is that Jason Johnson, like Jake said, we originally had, prohibit that, but we can't, because that's a jurisdiction, if you want to get a fill permit, you're talking about, Army Corps and DEQ and all that, those agencies. And so, like you said, they're the,
Well, they would love us to prohibit stuff because it puts the onus
Yeah.
on us then to enforce that.
Yeah.
Versus having an ability for someone to do that in a really strenuous permitting process, which is what we have right now. So.
Just keep yours back there and these guys can share the one up here.
What is a floodplain?
So floodplains are adopted by Congress as like jurisdictional maps under FEMA. So it's a 100-year floodplain, right? It's where if a flood were to occur, it would fill up into these areas. They typically use elevation lines.
Yeah, they pick an elevation.
So, personal experience, I live on a creek, and I was in the floodplain. I was in the FEMA floodplain. They look at a map and they say 300 feet from the blue line, right? Even though my house sits 20 feet above the creek. So by prohibiting from building in a floodplain, then really is not a good idea, because it really isn't in the floodplain. You have to go and hire a surveyor, do the elevation studies, get out of that floodplain.
Yeah.
So I don't think we should prohibit. Floodplain, in most people's minds, thinks that you're in a low area where it floods seasonally, right? Or could flood. But that's not necessarily the truth. You could be up higher in elevation and still be in that floodplain, according to FEMA. They drew lines and they want us to pay the money and get us out of the floodplain, do their work for them.
Yep. And it's, like I said, it's a congressionally approved map. So, and then there's a process, a letter of map amendment, where you're you are dictating a specific area and getting a study done on a piece of property or a portion of a property to be removed from the floodplain map. So then you're not subject to FEMA restrictions.
Right.
Their goal is to make it difficult because they don't want people building within the floodplain, because the more people that build within it, the more expensive it is when, a flood does happen. So they put up lots of bars of entry to build. Okay, you guys are fine the way it's written?
This is Dave Frankenbach, just a very minor comment. In number 2, we should fix the tense of the first word. It should be discourage.
Remove the D at the end.
I think that was Jake's mistake.
Definitely. I'll own that one.
We'll accept that.
And then I started a list that I can bring up at the end of terms I think we should define. In policy 5, excessive slopes, and I think that's one of the things we should consider providing a definition for.
I had a question on excessive slopes too. What does that mean in terms of discouraging development? Because there are some properties where the whole property has a lot of slopes. So what does that actually mean? How do you implement that? What was the thought behind that?
Yeah, Matt here. We already have the geotechnical chapter in ordinance, and I believe it calls out 30% already. And so if you're going to go ahead and build on that, or if it's in an area prone to avalanches or sloughing, I think is the language used, you have to have a licensed geotechnical study done on it before you're allowed to go ahead and get your building location permit.
When we were looking at other sections, you guys removed out the slope reference so can we kind of expand a little bit on, we removed it there, but it would matter here, because when we're talking about people that build on slopes, when we're looking at the location of the build, then there's requirements that come in of what you have to do to address the erosion and whatnot, so why would we leave it there?
I think where we were taking the slopes out was more in defining areas, using that as a criteria for, say, ag forest versus rural or something like that. This is more of a building concept that you don't want to have a high density development in a severe slope area if it's, but with modern construction techniques, you can build anywhere pretty much. But this is just a statement, kind of a policy statement that, high intensity development should not occur where there's excessive slopes. That was the concept. And I think as Matt said, I think we were thinking of something like 30%, but it could be defined.
Yeah, I just would like us to create a few definitions for key terms that are used throughout the document. So, but I agree with the intent. I think it's an important intent.
This is Dave Frankenberg again. I think in my mind, and I think we talked about this when we wrote this, the requirement for the geotechnical analysis is the discouragement that we're talking about. So we're saying if you want to put a house on a slope over 30%, you have to go through this level of technical analysis to ensure that you do it safely. So
That's reasonable from my perspective.
I think that further says we have to define what does excessive slope mean, because that's a cost, and one of the comments that gets made is asking people to pay for stuff before they know their approval abilities. And so to understand what that would mean would be, I think, a critical part for that section.
That's all I had for this section.
This is, so to be clear, we're talking the comp plan. We're talking broad overview of not necessarily one-offs, not someone coming in wanting to do one thing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
These are policies that would lead towards ordinance changes, right? So let's say modern, I think someone brought up modern construction techniques. If some revolutionary new thing came up and like all of a sudden building on a steep slope is just as safe as building on a flat, you would change this policy statement and say, hey, we're actually okay with this now, right? And then that would lead towards an ordinance change to get rid of our requirements and maybe align with some new construction technique or something.
Right. Okay.
Can I ask you on number 6, if the idea of number 6, the way it says regulate, conflicts with the comments made on the discourage residential, if we're not wanting to start to go into enforcement of that, do we want to use a term that says to regulate that? Or Because based on what we answered in number 2, the word regulate might not be the best word, or what?
This is Dave again. I think this is another case where there's the difference between the context when we're thinking about setting land use designations or zoning districts, which is 2 and 3, I believe. I'm sorry, more. This is actually number 6. So 6 is, we're talking about specifically density. So we're saying if you're looking at the zoning of an area that's in a floodplain, you don't want to make that a high-density zone. You want to
Which
make that a
is-
low-density zone. That's number 6. And then at the time somebody comes along and says, I want to build in that floodplain, or I want to fill in that floodplain, then the discouragement that we're talking about is the regulatory steps they have to go through with the Army Corps of Engineers and DEQ, et cetera, to ensure that, and get the right permits and make sure they do that in a safe and environmentally sound way. So I think it's those two different contexts between when we're setting zoning districts and when somebody's coming along for an individual property and saying, I want to get a building location permit.
So should some wording be added in there?
Well,
So- Because it
because
sounds like the
regulate-
county's regulating.
Yeah, that's,
Regulate the density.
I understand you're
Regulate
saying,
the
but it's
density.
regulate the density in the floodplain, which goes to the comment made on, when we were talking about number 2, of enforcing a standard that's greater than the county versus the language that says, the word regulate sounds more intrusive than what you said you wanted to be on number 2 versus addressing the zoning, like your explanation makes sense, but the verbiage sounds more intrusive than what you guys said on number 2 that you wanted.
So the way I interpret that is, as I was just hearing, 2 and 3 are talking more about how and where you define zoning designations, whereas 6 might have something to do more with what the setback would be from the floodplain or the floodway. That would be a regulatory aspect of our permitting, even though and then the other regulatory piece would be, and you must comply with all applicable federal requirements. And so I see the dichotomy there, and I think it works because there are 2 different levels. There's establishing the zoning designations, and then there's what you have to actually do to get the permit.
But I think that if you were saying establishing the location and density of new development is different than regulations, because your word can be used not just for that first part of that sentence, but it can also then be applied to floodplains, which I thought you guys are saying you don't want to be in the business of regulating that because that already exists. You're just addressing where the zoning would happen. So that's just, the regulation sounds bigger than what you're saying you want to do. You're wanting to address the zoning portion of it, which is, I don't know, it just feels like that's not what you guys are saying you're intending to do.
I think when you go back in 2 and 3, when you talk about discouraging this and discouraging that, you're doing that via regulation. And you're doing that via ordinance. So-
So when we were on 2, you guys said that it was you're following the floodways of not at the county level though.
So we
And-
do have our own adopted Title 14 standards, and that mirrors mostly the FEMA standards. We have a little bit of latitude.
So I understood that, but when you were mentioning what Jason said, you said he asked you to remove something because you guys didn't want to be in a position of enforcement of that. Am I repeating that correctly?
So we
if
don't
you're,
want to eliminate or prohibit the ability to build within the floodway.
because then you would have to be required to enforce that, correct? So if that's what the expectation is on number 2, if you go to number 6 and you use the word regulate, how does that not look like you're doing a similar thing is what I'm asking?
Well-
Because that's what it sounds like when I read that. And partly we're trying to update this so the community sees that. So when you're saying you're going to regulate that, I understand what you're explaining, but the verbiage in that doesn't come across that way to me. And if the majority of the board feel like it does, that's fine. But when I see regulate, it feels like you're saying you're going to do in that floodplain what you said in number 2 you don't want to do. You just want to allow the rules that exist, that mirror, to work, but not that you're doing something above. But you're really focusing on the density of zoning and how that impacts floodplains will be addressed by way of the rules that govern that.
Yeah, this is Alan Songstead. We're not regulating the floodplain. We're regulating the density and the location of developments. So that's something within the county's jurisdiction clearly, but we're not trying to say, we're going to enforce the federal floodplain laws. I mean, this is just density and location.
Well, you will have to, because when you regulate the development, it's the development in the floodplain, so you have to utilize the rules of the floodplain in order to regulate that density. And so that's what, when I see it, you're going to have to use that. And if in number 2, we didn't want to do that, that's just when we use that term, because I don't know where else I've seen the word regulate in, and maybe that could be a difference. That pops out to me as something that sounds bigger than what we're doing in other areas of the comp plan.
There's 2 types of regulation within the floodplain. And you have essentially what the federal government's looking at, which is not changing the flood elevation and not causing an increased hazard because of that. And then you have what the county's doing, which is saying things like, what do your setbacks need to be? What amount of lot coverage might be appropriate in a floodplain parcel versus a non-floodplain parcel? Because those can be things that contribute to and exacerbate the flood conditions. So I do think there's a dichotomy there that between local jurisdiction and federal regulated requirements, that I don't think we're crossing those boundaries with the language. So I don't see it as problematic. It's good to talk through it.
This is Dave Frankenbach. Maybe a suggestion that might help. First of all, I agree with what you're saying, Brian, but we could say something like establish setback and density, or setback regulations and development density in floodplains to reduce the potential for the loss of lives and property in those areas. Because that's a little bit more clear. That's exactly what we were saying we would do, but maybe that language is a little bit.
Be more specific.
What you
Yeah.
just said makes it very clear of what you're regulating.
How'd you say this? No, I don't. You guys come up with 30 ideas.
Dave does this all the time.
He does. He does so many perfect. He made it, and they say, "You got that right, Jake?" I'm like, "No."
So establish setback regulations and development density in floodplains to reduce the potential for the loss of lives and property in those areas. And we need to add it in property, those areas. We're missing a word at the tail end of that, number 6.
That's one thing I think we should define is what are we talking about when we refer to density? Is it the number of lots per acre? Is it the number of structures? The number of dwelling units? So that's one thing that comes up pretty regularly if you're going to define something and you're going to add definition. You might want to say density applies to both the quantity of lots within and the quantity of dwelling units or something like these lines.
So another suggestion just came to my mind. Should we include uses? Because I think we've talked about, we alluded to it up above in number 2, that there were certain types of uses that we wanted to discourage from happening
I
in
think
the
that would be a
floodplain.
good inclusion.
And that's actually a great question that I did forget to come back to, which is why would any of the other uses be considered less impactful? I'm just asking, why isolate just these? Why not include all? Is something that considered to be less, less worrisome in some way? Just trying to think through the logic of that.
Is a suggestion that, this Alan Songstead, is a suggestion to say new development and then specify the types of development, residential, commercial, whatever?
I guess I'm trying to think what other types of development occur in the county that we think are not going to be concerning or impactful in this case. does it make sense to identify those, or should we just make a broad statement? Is there some reason why these three are specifically identified?
I could see a logic to limiting commercial development in a floodplain or floodway. You know, we don't want a huge amount of traffic there. You may be able to build a house by, filling or whatever, but you may not want to have a lot of commercial development there. So maybe we should put some regulation on uses.
We have other ways in which we want to limit the places where commercial industrial development happen anyway. We want them to be adjacent to major highways and where we already have existing commercial development. We don't want to create sprawl, et cetera. So we talk about that a lot in the land use section. And I don't think, you'd probably be hard pressed to find areas that meet those requirements and are also in a floodway. That's not likely to happen.
Yeah.
So we're going to be, there's other criteria in other parts of the comp plan that are going to be pushing commercial and industrial development away from happening in the floodways anyway. I'm struggling to come up with an answer to your question, Brian.
I'm trying to play through, hey, I've got a file before me and I have to decide if the policies are being complied with, and what rationale do I use to say that these three should be applied, but if there's another type of use that it's okay, and can I formulate a logic path that tells me that's a reasonable argument?
I mean, the only thing that came to my mind is that typically, and this isn't universal, that's the problem, but, a lot of commercial and industrial developments are larger scale than an individual single-family residence.
Yeah.
So while you may be able to do some things on the scale of I want to build a home, it may be different if you want to build some kind of commercial or industrial enterprise, which typically is larger property, larger buildings, parking lots, all those kinds of things that come along with that.
Yeah, land cover makes a difference when you're trying to deal with floodways because of the no rise issue is challenging the larger the surface area is that you're developing.
Right.
If you have to raise that out of the floodway, then that's so I guess I either want to be able to clearly defend those three types of development, or just have it be a more broad statement that just says discourage development within floodways. But if we're going to have it be specific, I just want to make sure we can clarify why it's specific.
One issue, I think, with commercial and/or industrial uses would be environmental hazards, maybe chemicals and such. If you ever did have a flood
Things
in
that are
that
more
area,
commonly
you
going to
end
be
up with
hazardous.
that in the water.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's also material stored on site if you don't want it in a floodway.
So, sounds like then there are specific issues that could be related to commercial and industrial that maybe we want to identify just those two and not the residential, because the residential and all other types of development are essentially going to be covered under policy 3. Because then it's the fill issue in general. Because again, if you're dealing with something that's a smaller aspect and it can be more readily mitigated, then it can be discouraged, but it could still be permittable depending on the criteria that are required to meet that permit. Does that seem to follow the intent?
I'm not sure what you said, so you would eliminate residential from 2?
Yeah, because I see the point that's being made, the commercial industrial, they tend to be larger in scale, which is more impactful within the floodway, and there's more hazards potentially that would be created. I can't make that argument for residential specifically.
We're talking floodways, not floodplain. Floodways themselves, we typically have, floodways are like the.
Yeah, that's true.
imminent
That's
threat to flood.
the corridor, the path of travel
Yes,
for,
yeah.
right, the floodplain is actually the storage capacity versus
Yep.
the conveyance route, so.
I think residential could be a size issue. And so I think that you're allowing yourself the opportunity to review it to ensure that you're protecting that. So I'm not, because I think sometimes we think of residential as just a single-family house, but it could be bigger. It could, so.
True.
This is Don. One of the issues that's come up over the years
with residential, especially in areas like us, we do have propane tanks. And they can be sited anywhere on the site, but they float and they cause problems. That and septic tanks have a different thing because Panhandle makes sure that they're not. But propane tanks and other similar types of things
Yeah,
occur in residential areas.
and that's a hazard. Okay, convinced me. Thank you.
Okay, so leave it?
Yeah, unless somebody has another reason not to. I just want to find the logic that says I can defend it.
Did you guys want to add to policy 6 residential, commercial, and industrial development? I think that was discussed, but I'm not sure if it was concluded. Or just leave it open-ended.
I would leave that one open-ended.
Development. But it covers everything. doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I think there was some discussion about limiting that, but.
I have a question back on number 6.
Yeah.
Did you have something that?
Well, just stick in the word in after.
Yeah,
Okay,
I had that one as well. It's a property in those areas.
Going back to 6, talking about regulating, I really like Dave's explanation of through like the Army Corps and other jurisdictions. Would it be helpful to add that after regulate, like regulate by or through proper jurisdictions? Then the location and density of new development is, or I don't want to make things too long, but
You took it
and when
out.
you start adding things, they took out regulate.
He gave a different sentence for that section that addresses what they intended.
This is Dave again. Yeah, so for 6, I think that's talking about the regulations that are within our jurisdiction as a county. So it's setbacks, zoning density,
Okay.
or development density, I think were the words we settled in on. Whereas I think 2 and 3, here we're being a little bit, maybe a little vague, but when we talked about discouraging, and we talked about this, we, the Planning Commission, talked about this in our meeting, what we meant by discouraging was ensure that people go through all those federal regulations and that federal process for developing in those areas. So they have to conform to all those requirements, and generally speaking, that's a relatively expensive process to go through. So people really need to want to do what they're trying to do. But we're not telling them they can't, but if they do, they have to go through and follow all those rules from the federal government.
And is that spelled out in some other place?
It would be spelled out in the zoning code.
Okay.
So again, this is the general high-level comp plan, and this tells us that when we come to the zoning code, we have to put those, we have to reflect that desire here, that policy in the zoning code. And I think by and large, we already do. This is a case where the current zoning code actually already does that.
Okay. So we don't need to get into specifics.
Yeah, I agree, because we have kind of those 2 lanes. We have what the federal oversees and then what we can oversee. So I think that's good the way it is.
You want to read him the sentence that you changed it to?
So the way 6 is going to read, I think what you guys agreed to, is establish setback regulations and development densities of new developments in the floodplain to reduce the potential for loss of life and properties in those areas. That work? I'll try to get you guys this red line version today in you guys' inbox for review.
And then we're going to establish those setbacks. We're going to have different setbacks, and then so we were talking about floodplains again. So we get back to that same thing, that it may literally not be in a floodplain, but then are we going to leave that up to the person to do the survey and get themselves out of that floodplain, and then this would not pertain to them?
Yep.
Is that the thought process?
I don't think we have a setback specific to floodplains.
Yeah.
No, I don't believe we do either. We have a setback to water, surface water.
Floodplains are the surface water.
Yeah.
Floodplains themselves, we don't have
No.
a setback to.
Yeah, and my understanding is the only way to not be regulated federally would be to get the firm map updated to remove that portion of the property.
Okay.
At least that's been my experience on any project. And there's, yeah, very interesting things when you deal with floodways, and how they solve problems.
All right, want to move on to the next section?
Yes.
Oh, we didn't call for public comment on this, did we? No.
Good point.
Does the public have a comment on this section? All right, we'll move on to the next section.
Just for the record, Commissioner Eric Hidden from the Planning Commission is also online. Public services, facilities, and utilities.
My only comment on this one was under goals and objectives 1. It might be helpful where it says future development approvals should require adequate services. If we said should require the availability of adequate services, it should not adversely impact the services or utilities of the utility provider. And that's one of those, how high level should we be? Because sometimes, right, we talk about if you're within a district, or say a sewer or water district, that is a criteria that says you can, this is applicable. And then if you want the permit, you need a will serve letter, like there's levels of compliance. So something to think about whether or not it's too granular for the comp plan or if it's the way it should be.
Just, the goals and objectives should be leading towards policies, and the policies are what's going to dictate ordinance changes. So
Right.
we tend not to go back to the goals and objectives when evaluating and crafting the ordinance. So if you think that helps support a policy or change one of those policies, then or if it's just a clarification as well to align with current practice.
And that's, part of this comes down to, we have to define the term adequate. So I think if we do that, that might answer the question. So we may not need to answer that question right now.
I think that's going to be
This is Alan
hard
Songstead
one.
again. We actually did that, I think, in the actual text of the comp plan. We refer to adequacy. We're referring to adequacy, we refer to the agencies that determine that, like Panhandle Health, DEQ, that kind of thing. So it's sort of self-defined, if you understand what I'm saying,
Yeah.
in the text. So, yeah, we spent a lot of time on that, how do we define adequate? And we said, well, why don't we just go to the agencies that determine that? So that's what we did.
And I think that's a good point, and I recall you doing that now that you say it. And so I think maybe if we state that that's what the definition is based on. So the reason I bring that up is the challenge we have, right, is a lot of times a file says that we are only looking at the policies of the comp plan, not the whole comp plan. So I want to have that level of clarity in the policies of the implementation component, because that's the only thing that some of our decisions are based on. It's not the comp plan as a whole. And so while I don't want to be redundant, I also want to make sure that the policies aspect of the comp plan is something that is, in essence, it's a self-contained document because of the fact of how we use it to make land use decisions. So it's kind of this.
I don't think the word adequate is where the definition is needed. I think it's what Alan said, it's that it's adequate services as determined by the agency that it's pointing toward, because the word adequate is used other areas where it's not pointing towards the word services. So that, I think it's that what he said is just part of what's needed when it's that it's as determined by the outside agency. So it's how we apply that term, because adequate is used more than once in the comp plan. So in this section, to accomplish making sure it says what it comes across the way Alan explained it in addressing Commissioner Domke's comment, do you add in adequate services as determined and then add what Alan said in that sentence? Because just defining the word adequate doesn't fix the problem. Because adequate defined in this case is going to be different in a different section.
this is Dave Frankenbach. Do we need to make some change maybe to policy 4 to accomplish that? Because that's where we specifically state a policy that says new development should be adequately served by, and then a long list of public services there. But we don't specifically say as determined by the relevant service provider.
I think that would be a good clarification, to just add that at the end of the sentence. Because then it sort of bookends the intent of that specific policy.
I think that would be adequate. You don't want a laundry list of all the agencies.
Oh, the page.
That's why he's our leader.
I like adequate.
So just to the other policy for in other public services as determined by those agencies.
Relevant. Yeah. By the relevant public agencies. Relevant service provider,
Yeah.
whatever the right word is.
Relevant service provider.
Yeah, I think that provides clarity.
We spent too much time together yesterday.
Because that's what we use to service provider, existing service provider.
Oh, yeah.
So do we want to, Commissioner Donkey brought up an idea of modifying some of goal number 1. If we expand policy 4, do you think that covers your concern? Or do you want to?
Yeah, I don't think we need to adjust goal 1 with the changes we're making to the policy. And to your point, it's more important to have the most clarity in the policy.
And I have a note here to define adequate services. Or do you think the change to policy 4 covers that as well?
I think that addressed it. Yep, I think that's addressed now.
Matt, here on policy number 5, require developers to provide infrastructure to offset capital costs. I think that was primarily in there in case there's an impact fee ordinance ever adopted. Because without an impact fee, it's going to be, you can go ahead and require, developers to go ahead and pay the cost to extend services. Those services may be private sewer systems, water companies and things like that. And so that would be on their end at the time of development. But this also allows for impact fees to be adopted.
That's a good point.
Does the board have any further questions on this section?
Nope.
Is there any community comment on this section? All right, on to transportation.
Okay.
Can I ask on the goals, should it say instead of provide to support the transportation? Because does this mean that you're looking towards Bonner County creating a transportation system?
Our network of roads are a transportation system.
True, but it also leaves opening for the bus system, for that
It
type of
does read
transportation.
that way.
And
How about if we say transportation infrastructure?
it's not just roads, because when we're talking about increasing development in our areas, gotta save my air, so stop laughing.
No, but I am wondering if we could change transportation system
It lends it to
transportation
a-
infrastructure.
There's a section where we're talking about, when we were talking about spot bus and the transportation system, there's statute about that, and whether it's county or not, it leaves it open
Yeah.
to providing that, the way I read it. Whereas it's not specific to the roads, it's not specific to talking about roads.
Can we say network instead of system?
I don't know, it just made me think, are we gonna have Bonner County buses? Because it's
That was
a,
not our intent.
it wasn't,
I
but
didn't think
Because
so,
of a recent,
but it reads
recent
that way,
conversation in a
transportation
public
system.
meeting about budgets, yes, it's a
It came
valid
up.
I
point.
understand.
And there is a statute that talks about county can establish a public transportation system.
which is on buses,
So-
it's not on roads. The same road is used in both ways.
This is Don. I'm trying to remember, but I think that goal
came out of the existing comp plan, the way it's worded. It's always been that kind of flavor of things in the existing comp plan. There's a lot of policy or goals in there that say provide, provide, provide. So it may have been from that.
I think we messed with the ending of the word, like
So-
networks, systems, or
Yeah, the other day.
something.
In the schools facilities, you guys changed
Yeah.
transportation system to transportation service.
Service.
You wanna follow that same?
No,
That sounds
because,
even more like-
no, because the school district does provide a transportation service, we
and they are
don't.
buses. Yeah.
And that's,
Okay.
that's what Spot Bus is, and we're not that, so.
Because I
Does
don't,
network solve the concern? If you said transportation network, does that sound better?
I don't know the fix. I know we're not buying buses. That's all. I mean, and that's why I was saying support. I just don't want to get involved in the comeback of, this is a way of supporting, or, I mean, it's in terms of buses.
Why not just say what we mean and say, provide a road network that is safe?
Yeah.
And it goes.
That's about as clear as you can get.
Right.
Can we
That's-
add
that's
the
a
word
good
county?
point.
Because I don't want to mess with having to say, well, this road
Yeah.
goes through our county, because I don't want to deal with Highway
County road
41 or the
network,
90 or
that's
all the other
reasonable.
words. So let's be
Yeah.
specific to county.
No, and that's good too, because quite frankly, then, somebody could say, well, what about a boating transportation system? What about
Right.
the waterways or a transportation system? So,
I'm looking at Don.
yeah, everybody is.
I don't want to own more responsibility than what you guys intended in this section.
And then actually in code, in chapter 2 of Bonner County Code, it's referred to as a county highway system.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the system word has come across in all the affiliated parts. So, and typically it's the road system, transportation system, road system.
So we would be consistent with current language in code if we used county highway system.
So long as I'm not buying buses.
Consistency's kind of nice every now and then.
Yeah, I'm trying to link back to our road and bridge department and codes and.
Yeah, so county,
And then going through the policies to remove that, because even when you go to policy 1, it sounds like I can argue for a bus system needs to be created. Because it's one of the transportation elements that we do look at
well,
in cities.
and a long-range plan should at least give the opportunity for that to happen.
I agree with the opportunity, but provide means we need to work on it and start investing. If we don't delineate that's because when you're talking about increased development in various areas, we look at our transportation system.
Yeah.
And one of the things that reason you push to like your cities is because they have more of something like that for the increased density. So I just don't want to push us into having to move faster than what we're saying we're moving, and that's not part of the plan right now. And so, but that's not what this section is talking about. This section is talking about our roads. So I'm a proponent for being very clear that that's what we're talking about and not opening the door to other things.
So on one, you would say long-term road system?
The language that Commissioner
I would
Donkey
use
read.
county highway system.
Yeah, so I have a note anywhere it says transportation system to update that for the county.
County highway system.
Because if you don't do it that way, then you go to the section of opening it up for new development, participating in that infrastructure upgrade. If we're saying that's the county's responsibility, then
And then at some point, if the county wants to entertain something broader, more robust, that goes beyond the county highway system of roadways, then I think we can create a new term that has a definition that specifically supports that intent.
Because part of this discussion too has always been when a development comes in, and if they dedicate the rights of way to the public, that's an extension of the county road system. And that even, part of that discussion has always been,
should that developer be responsible for extending that road system to the boundary of their property so that the next property will have a public road system to attach to? So that's part of it. And beyond that, thinking about roads, we just historically think about vehicles being on there, and there's more than that. There's trail systems, there's bikes, pedestrians, all of it together. So it can get complex, but that's the other reason for using the word system, is because it's just that, it's a system of users.
Hey, this is Eric Hidden. I've got a question. Commissioner Domke, I hear you using the term highway system pretty consistently, and I'm just curious to know why that term rather than a road system.
Yeah, great question. Specifically because that's the terminology that's used in Bonner County Code, Chapter 2. And so adoption of a county highway system, and then it talks about the intent and the standards. And so I'm looking to create a link in consistency with terminology of what we're using currently within the county.
This is Dave. I would ask our resident transportation expert, is highway a term of art that means something different than just a generic road that we need to be aware of? Which word would you prefer as a resident road expert, road or highway? Which is more generic, I guess.
So this is the resident road expert. The term highway, I believe, the reason that the long-range transportation plan now uses that is because it links directly to federal funding. So federal funding comes through the state, to the counties, to the cities, and it's just a word that gets passed down through. In federal regulations, there's definitions of everything, and it just, if I'm remembering right, the term highway now says roads, streets are included in the
So it's
term
an
highway.
Overarching
So that nobody
definition.
says, well, wait a minute, you can't use federal funds on that street because
Gotcha.
it's not a highway.
Also,
You should have named it a lane instead of a.
but when it
Trails.
says highway, if something happens on that road, and when the county can't afford it, then when you're looking at opportunities for assistance with funding,
Right.
it opens the door for us to use that
It doesn't-
versus closing the door, because you
It
can't
doesn't
change
close
it
the door.
Yeah.
after the culvert fails, we
If you-
can't change it.
So to the point of the question that was asked to our resident road expert, it's a broad term, not an exclusionary term, and so it would be appropriate in the context of what we're asking.
And as
So
was
that
stated,
the
it's
question.
already in Title II. Why not use it here to be consistent? So,
Okay.
And we have highway districts throughout different parts. Anything further on the transportation commentary from the board before we go to public comment?
I would like an explanation on number 6, the policies. What does that mean? Are we to encourage higher density cluster development out in rural areas? Or what are we talking about here?
Isn't it the connection of the road? So developed means it's not that you're pulling that road into the network of roads that exist within the county, so that's part of the developer's plan? Is that what you guys were getting at?
that gets towards it, yes.
I totally understand the point to making sure that roads keep continuing on, but I'm not getting that out of the way number 6 is worded, if that's the intent of number 6.
This is Dave. It may not be perfectly worded, probably isn't, but I think the point was twofold. A, we want new roads, obviously, to connect to the existing county highway network. And B, we want them to do that in such a way that they don't overburden the existing network. So that's where consideration of things like intersection design and so on and so forth would come into play to make sure that you're not creating traffic bottlenecks in the way that you do connect to the county network. So just an example off the top of my head, if you had a development that say was a significant number of homes and the developer proposed to only connect it to the county network in one location, you might say, oh, that's a concern because now that intersection is going to be a traffic problem consistently. So you need to have multiple connections for that reason. Obviously, there's the fire hazard as well, but I think that's what we were trying to say.
Did this
In
allow
number
for
6.
the county to get developers, for example, when you look at the Spirit Lake, right on that cutoff road where that storage place went in, a lot of questions came up of how that intersection changes coming off of that highway, but that highway isn't our responsibility. But would that allow for something, a development like that, to say, you need to work out a way to not overburden that area with the correct agency since it connects with the state highway?
My opinion is yes, because we do say in 6 there that we're integrating with the state
I think,
system.
that one is one that has come up, and our answer from the county has been, we're not in charge of that, but it's been one that even now, the community still says that has a lot of accidents in it, but it's not within our control, but that development was placed there that did result in, there's no light
Why
kind
do I
of
have a
deal.
different 6 than what's on the screen? My 6 says encourage cluster development to reduce transportation costs. Whoa,
We'll let you go get your computer.
how did I get that?
I think you have an old version.
I got an old version.
That's 7.
That's nice.
You're on 7, maybe?
7 says cluster development, so.
7,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is my 6.
Uh-huh.
And you guys were really confusing me. I'm like, well, I don't know how you're expecting us to get
So this
that out
is-
of the way that's
You
worded.
want to get your computer, because it's, the 6 is,
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm talking about 7 then, I guess.
Okay.
Um,
Encourage cluster development to reduce transportation costs.
Yes.
So actually, the last part of the sentence, so the last 5 words after the last comma should be struck because it's redundant to the first half of the sentence.
True.
let me print this one for you so that,
Wonder if it's just this one
You're
or
on
is it
the-
all of them?
I think you're not on the
Yeah, I think
updated.
it's just an older version.
I just got what was given to me.
You want to get your computer, or you want to print it?
I'll just hit print if you don't mind.
I can't print from, can you print it? I can't, I'm not connected to the
Yeah,
printer.
you're gonna have my notes in it, but you can just read
Oh,
past
I don't
those.
need that.
I got one.
Oh, thank you. Because that'll really confuse you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, whoa, man. All right.
Doesn't have the changes in it, Ron, but that we made, but from here on out, you can follow it.
So can we go up to policy 4? So when it says that the roads should be built to county standards, I'm wondering if we should include something about and emergency services, county and emergency service standards. I'm just trying to figure out.
Are they different?
I think number 5, Matt here, I think number 5 kind of covers the fire aspect of it.
True,
Yeah.
true. Okay, yep, you're right. So the combination of them addresses that. Good.
You guys have those combined and then split them up.
Is that what we did?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
And then,
You read the same, yeah.
okay, and then if we jump down to policy 8, I'm wondering if we need to define certain intense land use developments. That's a very broad, vague.
Right. You know, Matt here, a couple weeks ago, we had a workshop with Barn County Road and Bridge and also the Chief Armstrong, fire chief. And the discussion came around of, well, what is a large-scale development type thing? And I believe he said, we discussed this last night just briefly, IFC, International Fire Code, calls out, if I'm not mistaken, it was 25 lots. And so there's a trigger mechanism in the International Fire Code for what they would consider, these high developments. And I feel that we should go ahead and fall in line, if we're going to go ahead and implement, IFC, we should go ahead and use those definitions. So when we say intense, as far as a density, you go ahead and use that 25.
I don't think we're adopting IFC as a county.
No, we're not, but we
Okay, just the way you
reference.
just said that. Have you?
No, what I mean by that is, we're relying on those fire districts to go ahead and say whether they have adequate access and stuff. And so when we go ahead and call out roads of development in number 5, those fire chiefs are going to be going ahead and looking at the International Fire Code. And so in a roundabout way, we're utilizing, their definitions, the criteria, that trigger mechanism of a 25, so to speak, for that high intensity, which would require double ingress and egress, so to
I
speak.
think we have to recognize that even though we're not accepting it, that's where they draw their opinion from, and that's part of what this parallel is. And part of what we're trying to do is give the people an idea of what is that expectation, so it's not adopting it, it's recognizing that that's really going to dictate the answer you get from fire, regardless of whether we say it or not.
It's Alan Songstead again. Remembering that this is a high-level document, I think you would define what an intense land use was that would require hard surface roads in the zoning code. Because it may change. We don't want to put, a number in here, 25, 30, 10, and then have that tension with the zoning code.
Yeah, I agree with not wanting that level of specificity in this document. I'm just trying to understand if we should have types of development or something that's helping. It's just a very vague term. That's what I'm challenging is.
I think we were referring primarily to residential development, if that helps.
I think I don't like vagueness, but in this, it allows us to understand what people's uses are and then apply a standard. Because what happens is some pieces of land can have an idea that might come out to be greater intensity than what we can really define as people change what they want. And I think that's the problem of we are trying to regulate roads and the impacts, but you don't know the impacts until you see what their requested use is on that particular piece of land. And the best you can do is define it kind of once it comes to you. Like when we looked at some files, some people look at increasing the development on a publicly owned, privately maintained road. If we increase the footprint on that road, creates an intense because of the magnification, but we can't really define that in this sentence. We have to see it when the file comes and we look at the road. And it's not the best method it's not always the best method to be so granular on a particular term, because my definition of intense is going to be different than someone else's definition, but the way we weed it out is allow the application to come forward, and that's what the Planning Commission uses the rest of that document to determine the intensity and the impact to the roads by way of asking, like the road and bridge, what do you see as the impact of increasing this development on this particular road and whatnot?
Now, this is Eric Hidden again. I think number 8 probably could be struck because it doesn't add any value over number 4, which says roads are going to be built to county standards. The county's going to tell us what's necessary, whether it's an intense land use or not.
I don't think the county standard is the same as the intensity of use, because when road and bridges, because you can have a road that's not at county standards and it's privately owned, and they don't have to until they want to pull it into county role for us to manage. That's where that comes into play. But in terms of, for example, when we were looking at where we're going to put, when you were down in the Blanchard area and we approved that development for, I say Poirier just because that's who did it, that intensity of use looks at that road. It's a road, it's an unincorporated area. That road doesn't get serviced a lot, but that was part of the calculation of, I think it's like over 20 lots off of that road. the intensity was gauged by the planning department to determine that that was reasonable, especially given kind of the other areas in this section of the proximity also to the state and the connectedness. I don't think that's met just by saying, does it meet county road standards? Because that road is not county road standards. But it can support that intense growth on that particular spot. I think there is a difference between the two, and this is allowing the county to have some checks and balances of the intensity of use by having that as a requirement.
Okay, I hear you. Then we might want to reconsider number 4 then, given what you just said.
I took that as actual developments at county road standards, because that's a different, I think they're different. The development itself, having a county road standard is different than, arguably, don't some of these roads, they're not in our jurisdiction either, because I was trying to think of like the Providence, that would be county, but their road standards for that area, if they were to be pulled into the city of Kootenai, are different than what the county is. So do we want to be specific at all on that standard? And allow the interpretation of what would the requirement be for the development versus being specific to who it would have to be, because we could potentially, I don't know.
We're still on number 4, correct?
Yeah, well, we were commenting on number 8, and then he went to 4 and said,
Right. See, because the way number 4 reads right now, any new development, that could be a 2-parcel short plat. It doesn't make sense to go ahead and make them build that road into those lots to county standards. There should be a trigger mechanism, so to speak, on what size of development creates that. And if I'm not mistaken, Jake, is it 3 or more currently?
Oh, we're talking about the definition of street, so you can have a shared driveway for 2 lots.
Right.
But as soon as it connects to a third property, then it's defined as a street for
Okay, and
setback
so do we-
purposes, not for design and construction of the street.
Okay, so this number 4 purposely calls out roads, not streets or lanes or driveways.
but in new developments though.
In a new, yeah, so, but road, how do we define road?
Well, I would say, how do we define development too? If we're talking
Yes.
about,
Right.
some people consider building a really large chicken coop development versus, is it splitting of properties? Is it changing the use from residential to commercial? Is it, yeah.
Right. I say, I don't believe it was the intent for, a single parcel split
Quitting?
into 2 parcels would require that roadway, that driveway to be built to county spec, if it's only going to serve 2 parcels.
What if the language said that there was to encourage roads to be built to county standards, which allows the interpretation? Because it'll apply in some areas. I don't want to remove the county standard, but that will address all of the concerns brought up.
I like that.
Did you get that, Jake?
So you want to change 4 to say encourage roads within?
No, to just say encourage roads to be built to be county standards, so you remove the idea of having to define development. It's just we should encourage that whenever possible, but we may not be able to apply that everywhere. And it'll address the 1 to 2 houses versus a full-on development where it's not reasonable and appropriate. Because what happens is sometimes these get built, and we've seen this in the county, where then after they build it, then they want the county to take over the roads, and then we have to have a whole discussion of, you need to bring it up to what county standards are before we can consider that, and then that will, I think, address it all.
Listen, Alan, so I said again, I think the other concept in this number 4 is that they should be built at the expense of the developer. So I think you're going to have to refer to some kind of development to get that concept in there. Because what this was intended to do was to require new development, however we define that, wherever, to be built to county road standards at the expense of the developer, not the expense of the county. So that was a critical element of this number 4.
And that takes you back to the one a little bit before, where it was giving us the opportunity for the impact fees, that ties those together. If you change the language to that encouragement, that can be part of your approval of your project itself.
Well, this is different than an impact fee. This is just a condition of development.
Right, it wasn't just impact fees in the other section, it's just in that section, it was leaving it open to push those fees of development onto the builder.
And in this case, not only the expense, but also the responsibility to build it.
Yes.
Did I hear a road becomes a street after there's 3 parcels or more? Is that a definition thing? A driveway becomes a street.
Actually, if there's 3 dwellings or more, it
No, that's
also,
GIS.
it also becomes a separately named.
Separately named street, yes. So if you have a house with an ADU and then another house, and they're sharing a driveway, GIS will make you name that road. But for setback purposes, we have it defined as connecting to properties, not homes or dwellings. So it's really for setback purposes of like an easement, if it's a shared easement. If it's 2 homes sharing a driveway, we don't require a setback from that driveway. But as soon as it connects to a 3rd lot or parcel, then it's required to get setbacks.
So would it help to change road to streets? Does that do anything for us or not? To get around the problem that Matt was discussing.
But the definitions that we have in Title 12 don't really apply to the comp plan unless you guys pull all those in, which would be this, cyclical issue of this is a guiding document to make ordinance change. So the way I have it written from what Commissioner Williams mentioned was for policy number 4, roads are encouraged to be built to county standards at the expense of the developer. Is that how you want it, right?
I think that meets all the concerns that were brought up.
Yeah, I think so.
Except for the fact that it may be that if someone wants to build 10 homes or something, when you're saying that you're encouraging it to be built at the expense of the developer, it's not mandating it.
Well, it's setting your policy, so it's giving you the door that allows you to open and to require it without the absolute that it has to be, because you're trying to address the small person and the large person. So you're saying there's an opportunity for us to say you must pay, and there's an opportunity to say that you don't have to do it. So you're not boxing us
So we
in.
can do that in a further step.
Title 12
It's in the
can
Title
define
12,
it,
that
but-
will define it.
So that'll be like changes throughout, like the subdivision chapter is a good one. So
Okay.
That's how we encourage it, through ordinance.
regulation.
Anything further on this transportation? So let's open up for public comment on this section. All right, no comment, so we'll go on to recreation.
This was pretty short.
Do we use the word scenic or rural more? Should we be consistent? That was the only comment I had, because scenic I don't see very often, unless we're talking about a scenic bypass. But in terms of the way the county is, we specifically address the need to maintain the rural character of the county. So my thought was to put that word in, unless someone could argue different.
I remember when we went through the recreation component, it read like a tourism guide to Bonner County. So there's a lot of those scenic and other types of fluffy words to try to encourage recreation and, yeah.
I agree,
Some
though,
of that
that
might be-
scenic and rural would probably be more consistent with the overall vernacular of the comp plan.
Yeah, this Alan, again, I think we use scenic there because recreation is a higher density area, which may not always be considered rural. I think it's rural, but it's more scenic than, I guess, rural. I mean, it's because it's a high density area.
I agree, but that's actually why I think the word should change, because the sentence is to preserve the areas character. And so what is the character that Bonner County has identified? As the comp plan as a whole, we don't identify a scenic character of the county. We identify a rural character of the county. And so in order to balance the two, if we change the word to scenic, when I look at that, it's changing the rural character. It's a shift away from what we have defined. And when you look at the sub-area plans, it's all saying to protect the rural character of the area. And so it isn't just, to me, it popped out as that's a change because we don't define the area as a scenic area. We define it as rural, which the argument then is the interpretation of that, but the preservation is what that is trying to do. And to me, that word needs to mirror what we've identified, because our comp plan starts with the rural character of Bonner County, not the scenic character.
I see what Alan's talking about, because I think the majority of our recreation areas are higher density along the waterfronts, resorts up in the mountains. I'm trying to think where else our recreation areas are at, which is not rural. So how would we be preserving our rural versus our scenic? We would want to be able to see the water as much as possible. Is that the intention here?
Yeah, that was the intent. I mean, take for instance, Schweitzer. I mean, you wouldn't consider Schweitzer as rural. It's high-density development, so it's still scenic.
Right.
You've got mountains and slopes and.
But you're encouraging recreation, not just in those places. And so when you're looking at recreation, that can occur in a rural residential area, people are looking at the rural area, and that's what they're looking for us to preserve based on what our comp plan is. So to me, Schweitzer is outside the bell curve. It's a whole grouping. But when we're talking about encouraging someone who wants to look at our map and say, this, I'm allowed to do recreation here, if the county is supposed to be looking at how do we balance the character of the county, and what is that character defined as? It isn't, Schweitzer doesn't define that character, we've defined it as a rural character. So when we're encouraging recreation outside of the bubble that is Schweitzer, it is rural that we're saying that we want to preserve because we've defined that in the comp plan. It's not scenic, because if you look at the rest of the comp plan, we're not even referencing that language elsewhere.
Well, when you get into suburban and recreation areas, remember this is a land use designation. So let's take Stone Ridge, for instance. Stone Ridge is a recreation area. That's a land use designation for that area. That's not considered, I wouldn't consider that rural. In fact, I would consider it the opposite of rural. And the same is true around all of our, our lakes, most of our lakes. Those are pretty high density development. I mean, they're usually less than 1 acre, sometimes significantly less than 1 acre, down to a quarter of an acre.
But didn't we do things to preserve the rural character of the Stone Ridge area? Because when you look at Stone Ridge, that growth and development of that recreation is making sure that we preserve the rural of the whole area that is Blanchard. And so that's the
why
line.
Blanchard, that's why not all of that area is designated recreation. This is a land use designation for recreation areas. So, we weren't consistent around the waterways either, because we tried to do that, and we got a lot of pushback from the community that they wanted to see, some of those areas as rural 5, which is fine. We left it that way on the map. But the recreation areas that had been previously designated as recreation areas are high density.
So
At least by the standards of this county.
But we're kind of saying the same thing, though. We took the Stone Ridge, and in the area, there was consideration for preserving the rural area. And so the size, the development, and the plan came into play to address that. Even though it was determined that when you're looking at Stone Ridge, and actually when you come towards that highway, that's recreation, that's what the zoning was. But the question in this section is, how do you define the preservation? And it was to preserve the rural portion of it, the idea of the county, not just the scenic, because then if I change it to scenic, then that's not preserving what the county is. It's just a view versus what does the view mean? To me, it's a shift that changes the overall character of what we're saying that is Bonner County. It's not about whether or not recreation goes there. It's when we put it there that we need to preserve a characteristic that is Bonner County while we're deciding where to put it. And it's not a scenic characteristic that I feel we're supposed to be preserving. It's the rural characteristic that we're supposed to be looking at the preservation of. That's how I see that section. But I understand what you're saying. I just see that as a shift. And looking at the Schweitzer Mountain that's not defining the character of the county. It's the recreation wants to go various areas throughout the county, not just in an isolated spot like that. And if I am in a residential area where recreation can go, consideration for the rural character when we're putting it there should be considered, not just a scenic type of a view.
So
This,
go ahead.
this is Dave. I agree, and I forget which one of you said that recreation can happen in a lot of places throughout the county, not just in those areas that are designated as recreation by their land use character. And so I don't think we should conflate this recreation section as applying only to those areas with the recreation land use designation. This really applies to recreation throughout the county, wherever it might occur. And in that context, then I agree with what Commissioner Williams is saying, that it happens in a lot of places that are in the rural parts of the county, and we need to preserve the rural character. I would also be fine with, I think earlier you suggested rural and scenic, or scenic and rural. I'd
Yeah,
be
I
okay
think
with that
both
language
terms
too.
make sense to me,
Yeah.
because I think both are a reality of what drives some of the recreation desire in the community. And so I think scenic still belongs there. I think we should add rural. And I think part of why we should add rural is I believe that specifically speaks in part to policies 1 and 2. I think it becomes part of the supporting logic for why policies 1 and 2 exist. Because part of that access is about the rural lands that we have that provides a portion of the access within our county. And I actually would like to add a policy. I would suggest that we add a policy 5 that says something along the lines of recreational development should support and enhance nearby residential areas and avoid creating negative impacts to the neighboring properties. Because we have this development piece that also happens because of some of these land designations and what that turns into, because we do have development that is specific to that resort and recreational access. And so there's a lot of good items in here that are talking about access to public lands, but we still have a development piece that I feel like we haven't directly spoken about with regard to that I'd like to capture.
Could you repeat your
Yeah.
suggestion?
The suggestion would be recreational development should support and enhance nearby residential areas and avoid creating negative impacts to the neighboring properties.
So this is Matt here. When you're saying recreation development, so are we referring to the recreational, like Dave said, they're different. Recreation and the recreational zone are two different things. So when you say recreational development, I don't know, can you give an example or give?
Yeah, that's the kinds of things I ask about a lot,
Oh,
right? So,
okay.
Yeah, but to me, it's truly anytime you want to build an enhancement to support a recreational use, then we need to be considerate of what the adjacent neighborhoods are, how they would be impacted.
Resorts, retreats, marinas.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because it's a recreational use and a recreational access purpose development, of which we have multiple types in our comp plan, in our code. And maybe the terminology is not the right terminology, but trying to capture the idea that we have development that's specific to recreation. So we need to be thoughtful about the adjacent neighborhood as a part of that development.
Yeah, I think it should be considered for sure. I keep thinking back in Lupa where it says, one of the purpose, allow for mobile home parks, be conscious about impacts, but we have to allow certain uses. they have to go someplace. And so if we're trying to encourage, strive, and promote diverse recreational opportunities, obviously there has to be a balance there. And a lot of those recreational opportunities are going to be adjoining, different public lands. It's a great spot for some of these things. Dude ranches, snowmobile tours, things like that.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I think it's important, because if I want to create that kind of a development, it's normally because there's an area that I value being nearby to access, which also means that there are a lot of people who probably purchased and developed their homes in that area because it's rural, because it's a low density area. And so there's this balance that we have to strike between accessing that area and not creating an impact to the folks who are trying to live in that more secluded, quiet, lower density location. And so to me, there's a natural tension that happens there, and we just need to be cognitive of the fact that we have to be thoughtful about how to address it.
Sounds like a good addition to me, so.
We can massage the language, just trying to get something to capture that. Yes, no, maybe so.
Commissioner Corn, do you have any comment?
I'm still kind of bouncing back to the goals and objectives on number one.
Are you saying you were ignoring me?
Not at all. Not at all. I wouldn't do that.
Are you on the right page?
I am now. I'm in the right book. I understand what you're trying to accomplish, Commissioner Domke. How do we do that?
Yeah, some of it probably will have to do with setbacks and buffer standards and things of that nature ultimately that show up in the code.
And is there other places in the code that would address certain things, like roads and issues? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's why I just want to say that we should be considering it.
Yeah, and the recreation goes to, like Matt was saying, a snowmobile guide or something, hunting guides would be the same thing, right? Somebody buys a 20 acres up at the end of the road somewheres and decides he's gonna open a guide service. And is that gonna be like 5 cars a week? Because they're going out for the week, or is it gonna be 80 cars a day? So I don't know how that gets presented in this case.
And that has to get worked out essentially in Title 12. So I think if we agree that it's something that needs to be considered within our code, then we just need to have the language that derives the fact that then the code has to be written to do it.
So.
This is high level, remember, the code is what will help kind of guide that.
What types of uses would support and enhance without having an impact? Even if you put a marina in where it supports and enhances that recreational area, it's going to have an impact. There's going to be more roads, there's going to be more noise, there's going to be more boats. So I don't think, what I'm thinking through my head, how do you support and enhance and have zero impact?
I don't think you will have zero impact. You'll have impact.
Because I hear that pretty often with conditional use permits. There's no way to mitigate the impact. If I build a house, which I'm permitted to do, it's going to have an impact on my neighbors. If I get a dog and the dog starts barking, it's going to have an impact, right? That wasn't there before. You're never going to eliminate impact. So even reducing impact, you're not going to support and enhance an area and reduce impact, right? So I'm just curious if there's another way to massage that language.
No, that's a great question.
To kind of go in line with what you're still trying to.
In other places, this is Dave, in other places, we have used the word mitigate the impacts. And mitigate doesn't mean take it to zero. it means reduce it, and I think you have to balance it. And so it's, reduce it to a reasonable level, all things considered, the nature of the business and what the surrounding area is like and so forth.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I would argue for that
You
language.
could do language that might be more along the lines of recreational development should consider or reduce impacts to nearby residential areas and mitigate any identified negative impacts, something.
I think that's a lot of specificity, because then the interpretation, that will lend itself to, because when we're trying to balance the property rights, the person who doesn't want that development is going to say, nothing that you're going to do is going to mitigate, reduce, or eliminate my issue of what I don't like about that. And so if we leave it as, we need to balance, because it's consideration on both sides, or to mitigate versus saying which direction, because people have their special issues and concerns on every side, and we're never going to trend to where someone's not, that zero impact of something. It's that we need to thoughtfully consider the impacts of growth and development on both the developer and the people that are next to the development side. I think that we don't want to go so specific onto that section. I like the way that Dave commented on it. I think that addresses the concerns on both sides.
All right, Dave, how'd you say it? Come on, Dave. So I have.
Brian, read back your suggestion. You suggested it.
Last suggestion,
Your
I can't
fifth policy. It was,
You want the original suggested
yes,
language?
yes.
Recreational development should support and enhance nearby residential areas and avoid creating negative impacts to the neighboring properties.
Maybe just say it.
So I would say while mitigate, instead of avoid creating, I would say while mitigating negative impacts to surrounding properties.
That's exactly how I had it written.
I think we've used that
I
language
concur.
in
Can
quite
you
a
say
few
the
other
first
places.
sentence again?
Recreational development should support and enhance nearby residential areas.
I don't like that, because the person that doesn't want recreation is never going to say that supported them. I think that shouldn't be the sentence, because you'll never win that argument.
Yeah, I see your point.
Are there any recreational uses that are outright permitted in any zone?
Have to pull the code out.
Your conditional use permits and your condition of saying you enhanced me
We
is,
don't have a recreation use table, so some of that is up to interpretation as to what you're considering recreational uses.
Somebody who values access to whatever the particular recreational opportunity is going to say, putting that thing in my neighborhood has enhanced my neighborhood.
and the person that
Doesn't
doesn't want
like
it
it.
is not. And
But then
so
it's a
when you-
balancing act.
When you say that it should enhance, then our argument is going to be about the enhancement, and that interpretation is litigation worthy, because it is up to the personal interpretation of the boards that will be on the approval, the denial, and the different sides, versus saying we should mitigate that. When you have to say it has to enhance, that's a hard hill to climb.
Yeah, I agree.
Good thought, though. Recreational permitted outright is outdoor theaters. You want to consider that a
Like a marina is a CUP,
I
right?
think you guys should consider that and offer us some feedback on that.
That actually should be changed,
Is that
because
a
who's saying what's
amphitheater on the
playing?
side of the mountain that the entire valley can
Because
hear?
we do movies in the park and on our property, and I can see people saying, what movie is playing does not enhance my lifestyle. I think that should be on review. But I just,
We'll change it to a C.
Keeping of equine animals is also permitted outright in the rec.
So what if we said something along the lines of the impacts of recreational development should be balanced against
how about considered? The impact should be considered or weighed. I just don't want it, we're just pitting ourselves against, because there's always a yes and there's always a no. And really what we're trying to do is that we're just trying to balance the different uses of the land and how they impact. And so we need to balance them and consider them. And then the code is what's going to help us decide where we go. But this is really not, this is not teeth, and the sentence should just be very much a balanced mitigation, and the code is where we're going to get granular. Not in this section.
No, I don't think anybody's arguing that, just trying to figure out what the language should be.
Well, that's why I said, just not too many words. Balance or mitigate, I mean, can you remember what you said, Dave?
You could say recreational developments should consider impacts to the neighborhood, surrounding properties, whatever words you like to use there, and negative impacts should be mitigated.
Can we just say impacts, because negative is interpretation?
Okay, I'm all right with that.
Well.
That's fine.
Positive impact, should that be mitigated?
Yeah, I
Well,
think
No.
negative impacts make
No.
sense. Yeah.
Well, it's not, an
It should be
impact is
defined.
not negative or positive. So if I want to put an RV park where I need a conditional use permit, the person that wants it sees it as positive and they give all the reasons why it's positive. The area that doesn't want that sees it all as negative. That's why I'm saying if we define it, if we say negative, you're choosing which direction versus it's an impact.
But to Don's point, you only mitigate a negative impact, you don't mitigate a positive one.
But the definition of whether it's positive or negative is based on which side you're making the argument for.
To put in the word mitigate.
Right. Because in the end, we have to decide
No,
what's
mitigate
negative and
means,
if it needs to be.
but you're
it can be mitigated.
balancing, it makes you as the county more neutral of what's coming toward you. Because you're mitigating, the person who wants it is going to say why it's good, the person who doesn't, it's why it's bad, and you're balancing the two, not saying it's because we would be you're making a decision determination on a land use by way of the way you word it, in my opinion, if you say that it's negative. I just see it's an impact.
It just, there's no logic behind mitigating a positive impact. I don't understand how we could defend that.
You're gonna have to define it.
Well, there is, because increase, so the guy who says, I want to build this development because it allows for additional low-income housing, that's a positive impact. You can have, that the idea of that development is positive, but there is still an impact that can be seen as negative that has to be mitigated. It depends on what your perspective is on the issue. That we see that all the time in these files. What they want to do is positive, but it has an impact that we are needing to mitigate, just like we did that with roads. The development is great, but we're mitigating the impact based on saying how we want the road to be built.
I'm
That's
just saying
mitigating
we
it.
only mitigate something that's a negative impact.
It isn't, but the negative portion is an interpretation of which side you're on. The developer who put their development in can say, mine's not negative, therefore I don't need to do that because it's positively allowing for low-income housing, which your housing section says that we need. So I'm benefiting you. So why do I have to put the money into it because it's all positive? It's just an impact.
But we're the arbiters that decide what the negative impact is and how it should be mitigated.
What about
After you
adverse
see it,
impact?
after you see it,
Adverse
but you don't know it, because
impacts.
it's similar to what the realtors do, say this oftentimes, where they see the way we are making decisions are kind of pigeonholing their industry through the way in which some of the terminology is. I'm just saying, to define it as negative or positive is an interpretation. It's an impact that we're just mitigating and not making, and addressing, if it's an impact to the road, we have something in our plan and in our code that's addressing the impact to the road, to bring it to a standard or to not bring it into standard. It's just an impact.
But you're going to have to decide whether an impact is negative.
In the hearing, not in this, though.
In order to mitigate it.
Right, in this particular document, we've said it's a high-level document that gives us direction, and then the code is telling us where we're going. When you go and say in here, define it as negative, to me, that's your interpretation of something depending on which side you're coming to the argument on. Because that's how all of the files are. I think it's too specific. I don't think it's inherently one way or another, it's an impact. But if you guys are fine with it,
So
I
the
just-
terminology that's been used prior in this document is adverse impacts, or impacts in general, depending on the context of the sentence. So,
Just like in number 4.
yeah,
Adversely or not affected or adversely impacted.
right. Yeah, I think it's important to indicate that we're addressing adverse impacts, because again, if everything was a positive impact, then it would just thumbs up, walk away. There's no more work to be done. So,
anything further on that section?
Well, how do you guys, what's the?
You guys are just supposed to mind read. and just put it down.
did you modify based on Dave's comment, the language?
I didn't get a general consensus, so. Right, the way I have it drafted now is residential development should support and enhance nearby
Recreational.
recreational development should support and enhance nearby residential areas while mitigating adverse impacts on the adjacent neighbors.
Yeah, we were still trying to change that language to get rid of the original part that I had said with support and enhance. We were trying to modify that.
Yeah.
Because I agree, it's not, because that is kind of a double-edged sword of.
Very subjective.
I agree the original language is not good, so we should modify it.
So if you take that out, how's it read?
Residential development should,
Recreational.
it's, I have it written as recreational, I don't,
Are you sure?
yeah, he's looking at it. Should, no, because we're changing the context of the sentence now.
Yeah.
So it should say adverse impacts caused by recreational development should be mitigated. Or some,
Yeah.
changing the structure of the sentence too much.
I think keeping it that truncated is a cleaner.
Okay.
I think that's what another commissioner
Because
said
the
earlier.
concept that you were trying to get at, so.
Exactly. Yeah, it goes back to, we know it's gonna happen, so if we have a policy that recognizes the importance of it, then again, we'll drive ordinance that's applicable to that.
Did we decide to leave our goals and objective the way it was written? What did we decide on that?
He added rule.
We did?
I have replaced scenic with rural.
Oh, we were
He
gonna add
added rule.
Oh, scenic.
rural and scenic,
Okay.
or scenic and rural. Either way.
So my only concern on it is in these recreational areas where it's not rural, is that going to prevent people from doing things?
I would say no, because it says while preserving the area's scenic and rural character. So you can't, if it doesn't have it, then there's nothing to preserve. So it's contingent on it already being there, is the way I read that sentence.
Because I'm looking at like places up in Priest Lake or something, that's recreation, right? And it's not rural.
Right, it's highly developed.
And what if somebody wants to come in and add a similar thing and just keep enlarging this rural or this recreational area, but now what you're taking away from the rural characteristics of that?
Didn't exist
Yeah,
though.
so you can't protect something that doesn't exist. So, and I don't,
The point, my comments on pushing for that to get put in there is this sentence says we're preserving. So you're preserving what's already there. And so in your example, it doesn't exist, so we're not requiring the new situation to create the rural character. This is only saying if it exists, we're preserving it.
Right, so, and I'm not really familiar with the Priest Lake area, I'm just gonna use that as an example, but you have a bunch of small lots along the lake there. And then I think there's some R5s along the lake, so is that gonna prevent those R5s in the future from going recreation? Because the rural does exist, and then you're going to take it away? or you're not going to allow it because we're not preserving what is there?
I don't think your scenario, I understand what your question is, but I don't think your scenario exists. This is for, in your example of the future development around the Priest Lake areas based on it, that your example isn't there. But in the example of increasing recreation and balancing that with rural character, you would have to balance it with the character that is there, not creating character. And so if, for example, if you're going to give the situation of if everywhere around Bonner County is smaller lots, but there's 3 lots that are 5 acres, and someone wants to build another smaller lot, you're not taking away the character by continuing with what that area is, because you're balancing the two. This is just making sure that in the rural areas that you're balancing the rural and the scenic, because in a way we're agreeing that they're 2 different types of things. And so we're just making sure we are addressing that when we're addressing recreation, which has the opportunity to go a lot of different places around the county.
I guess in my mind, yeah, you could have, say, a recreation parcel that doesn't have a scenic view. And so if it doesn't possess that view, then there's nothing to protect
Right.
for that parcel with regard to that specific element.
Right.
But maybe there's a different element that should be considered. Does that seem
It
reasonable?
does. I was just concerned that we might disallow somebody from doing something because it would be taking away from the rural character, even though it might abut currently a actual recreation zone. At some point in time, that zone changes from recreation to suburban or rural, right?
No, I see what you're saying. And from a hierarchy perspective, that's a goal and objective. I don't see where anything in the policies would lead to that conclusion unless somebody else sees it.
I want to step
Good
away
question.
from this meeting and give myself a 15-minute treatment before our next meeting, so if you guys could finish, there's only one left.
You're gonna leave this in our hands?
4 left.
Well, I've got 15 minutes left.
This is Dave. I don't know if this helps or not, but when I think of the area in that context of that policy, I'm thinking the overall area, not the specific area where somebody might be contemplating a new development. Would it help to say to preserve the county's scenic and rural character? Because that's really, I think, what we're trying to preserve is overall. That doesn't mean that there aren't locations, Schweitzer, Stone Ridge, there aren't locations that you would say, that's not rural. We can have them, but overall, we want to preserve the rural character of the county. Maybe that helps, maybe it doesn't, I
I
don't
think the
know.
fact that it says areas already, possessive, that areas,
Yeah.
so I think it does. Yeah, so I think, to your
Or-
point, I think that's captured.
To that point, what about just adding of the county at the very end of the sentence? That way you're incorporating the natural resources and everything else. Is that
The
redundant?
sentence
or-
structure is wrong then.
Yeah.
The way he had it clarifies that better.
Okay,
The county's scenic and rural character, the county's natural resources, and the county's ecological system, so
okay,
it puts the
Yeah, that
possessive
works.
in the right spot.
all right.
Okay?
Did we kill that one?
So on
Twice.
this policy 5, let me read it back to you one more time. This would be the ad.
Yes, please do.
So adverse impacts of recreational development on adjacent neighborhoods should be mitigated.
I think that's correct.
Okay.
I think that's what we agreed on, and you said recreational, good job.
Did I say
You
recreational?
did, you did. You said it as you read it.
We had a long night. Okay.
Do we have any public comment on that section? Here's not.
Okay, moving on to scenic or special areas and sites. So just as a note, I think we had slotted this in the board's time up till 11, which is in about 10 minutes. We have special areas, housing, community design, agriculture left. Thought we would have gotten through this, but you guys have a handful more questions than initially thought.
We always exceed your expectations,
Yes,
Jake.
you do. Given that, we do have this slotted for a hearing already, and it's been advertised as such for on the 12th, next week. If you want to try to book another workshop workshop between now and then. It'd have to happen either tomorrow or Monday or Friday. So
Let's see.
just as a heads up, as we're kind of getting close to that 11 o'clock.
I think we should try to get one scheduled for Monday as a safety net, because we do have an 11 o'clock ambulance district meeting.
Yeah, I thought you guys had a hard cutoff.
So yeah, we won't be able to run over. In fact, we'll probably need to end in 5 minutes to give time to transition technology. So I think we're gonna need to try to schedule it on Monday. Sorry, guys.
What day is that?
Monday?
It looks like there's
11?
availability Monday afternoon.
Monday afternoon? Okay.
So I'd say we plan for that and see how much more we can get done in the next 5 minutes.
Do you want to start another section?
I think we try to get through special areas or sites.
Sounds good. I hear no comment. You want to move on to housing? Sorry.
So I'll throw one out there again, just food for thought, and we can run it through the mill. But the last policy, policy 4, affirm that no historical structures or sites exist within a land use application area. I don't know if it's affirming whether or not they exist that we want to do, as compared to confirming if the application could cause, if adverse impacts could be caused to such an area, and require mitigation. It's just, I don't know, I'm trying to confirm if that's really the way 4 reads, if that's our full intent.
I think what we meant there was that we need to contact the relevant, organizations that
Yeah.
will be able to identify an historical structure.
Is for site. SHPO has lists, the local has lists.
Yeah.
They also have criteria, then what do you do with it?
Right.
What elevation, what
Yeah.
level does it fall in and so forth, so it's hard to stick something in there that talked about mitigation.
My computer died.
So I'm just wondering if maybe the language should be something that has more to do with what we've done with other jurisdictions, to just indicate that we're going to coordinate with applicable jurisdictions associated with.
You could say identify any historical structures or sites of its history.
Yeah, I guess part of what I'm trying to get at, and I haven't said it well, I apologize, is a site can exist. A site can exist, but it can still be developed, potentially, depending on what the jurisdictional agency determines is acceptable. So the way it reads right now, it's kind of like, well, you have to confirm nothing exists, because if it does, get in the water, and I don't think that's our intent. So I've done a lot of projects as a project manager where we had historic artifacts discovered on a site, and we were still able to develop the site. We just had to meet certain criteria about how to remove those artifacts appropriately or to build around them. So to me, the language doesn't quite read that way right now.
You just put that between the two of you guys, huh?
So when you started a project like that, somebody says you must be aware of artifacts. That's all they said,
No,
right?
no, because we had to confirm if they existed, and then we had to,
Right. Confirm they exist, and then you go and you talk with the agency of relevance. I mean, so this is, I can't remember whether the code says if artifacts are found or the sites that are known on a list, what do? You have to contact, I think it says, talk about SHPO.
and this is where maybe you can just say confirm if they exist, because right now it says affirm that no historical structure. So you have to affirm, it's affirmative, they don't exist. But if they do exist, it's just the way it reads. It's
Yeah,
like,
okay.
I'm sorry, this is an ultimatum, you cannot have. I don't think it is, and that's why I think maybe if we just massage the language,
Yeah.
because the way it reads to me is you just can't have them. So I don't think that's the intent.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
You just say maybe identify.
Yeah.
Yeah. Identify if.
If, to me, it's the if versus the no.
Jake?
He's like, I'm trying to get my computer.
My computer said it had 10% left and it died, so
They always lie about that.
so you want to
Like the
change,
gas gauge when you get below
Right.
the water tank.
it was, look at my note.
Confirm
Policy 4?
confirm if historical structures or sites exist in the land use application area. Because then that'll trigger the agency coordination as required.
Cool, I got that.
So then it sounds like we'll just have the remaining 3 sections and a discussion of definitions left for the next meeting.
Anything else on special areas or sites? Do you guys, or is that wraps that section up?
Was there, yeah, we're gonna have to just wrap it up because it's 5:00.
Okay. Sounds good. We will start there.
So,
Monday.
yeah, so we'll continue, it's 10:55 and we'll continue this meeting to
Day 1.
Monday, August 11th at 1 PM.
What
Thank you.
components do we have?
So we have special areas, sites,